Welcome everyone to the Fall 2015 Post-Secondary Transition Plan training with Vermont Agency of Education. My name is John Spinney. I'm the Post-Secondary Transition Coordinator. And we have Ernie Wheeler, who is the coordinator for the Special Ed Monitoring Team. And we're here to go over the transition plan training with you. And I'll hand it over to Ernie now.
What we're looking at today is what we call Indicator 13. It's part of the State Performance Plan. There are 17 indicators. Indicator 13 has to do with post-secondary transition plans. Plans that begin with the first IEP in effect when a student turns 16 years old, or younger if appropriate, and is part of our annual count to the federal government. What you will be filling out for us is part of the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center, an 8-question checklist. And each question in the checklist has 3 areas: education and training, employment, and independent living, giving you 24 ways to have something non-compliant on your IEP. Each IEP that gets submitted has to be 100% compliant in order to pass. What happens is you submit. If we find any non-compliance, we send it back to you for corrections and you resubmit. What we're hoping is that your first submission will be 100% compliant and we won't have to send you back any corrections.
So just to chime in on this one, for all of your staff who are writing transition plans in the IEP, everything must filter through these 8 items on this checklist. And so if your staff really truly understand this checklist and can literally filter their plan through this so that they're really self-monitoring in terms of the compliance side and hitting each of the 8 items, you're going to be in a much better spot once the monitoring team can review it.
So area 1 has to do with, is there evidence the student was invited to the IEP meeting where the transition services were discussed? Typically, we have found over the years that this is a good area for the state of Vermont. Most IEP teams include the student at this age level. And if the student can't be due to cognitive delays, that someone is there to act on behalf of the student or give these students input into the meeting. So in many cases, we see very good numbers coming out of this particular question. Here are some examples and non-examples where Susie's case manager sent her a meeting notice. That would be a good example for us. Or Susie was invited to attend her post-secondary transition meeting verbally by her case manager. The non-examples is Susie's mom was in attendance. It doesn't say to us that Susie wasn't able to be there because of cognitive delays and mom was taking her place, or just to say that Susie did not attend doesn't tell us that she was ever invited. Question 2 happens to be one that we run into occasional problems with within the state. The question here is, if appropriate, is there evidence that a representative from a participating agency was invited to the IEP meeting with the consent of the parent or student that has reached the age of majority? Many times we find that, especially for younger students, outside agencies have not yet been involved with the student or been invited to these meetings. Saying that is okay for younger students. We'll accept that the team has decided that it's not appropriate to invite an outside agency at this time, but for older students, we definitely are expecting that involvement.
And so now there has been some significant changes to the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, and so the real quick piece that you need to know is that Vermont Voc Rehab, as well as Voc Rehab departments across the country, have had to completely restructure themselves to meet the changes with WIOA. And what Vermont did is basically make it so that all of their transition counselors are now 100% of their time is focused on in-school youth. Prior to the changes, only 30% of their time was dedicated to in-school youth. So now you have an additional resource. They're going to be much more available to come to your IEP meetings, whereas they may have previously said, you know, our workload is too big, we can't make that meeting. They have more capacity now because they're not working with students in college and adults. They're focused on in-school, high school youth. And some of them also have a youth employment specialist who's also very skilled at job development.
So really what we're looking at from this question is, was the outside agency invited? We don't necessarily, we're not going to say it fails if they didn't attend, at least that you invited them. Or you made a comment or a statement that the team decided it wasn't appropriate to invite the outside agency at this time. And here are some examples again and non-examples.
Some other folks that you may find are appropriate to invite might be perhaps a developmental services intake person, or maybe their supported employment person. Maybe.
For an ED student, it could be a mental health agency. For a student who's going on to post-secondary education, it might be VSAC. Yeah. Question 3 is the area that I think we have the most difficulty within the state. The transition plan is supposed to be based on age-appropriate transition assessments. Those assessments can either be formal assessments, such as interest inventories or aptitude skills, or it can be informal assessments, such as an interview with the student, or in the case, again, of a student who's going on to post-secondary education programs, it could be a description of their academic skills. The important thing here is not only to identify the assessments and the date the assessments were given, but also to summarize the assessments. A lot of times we see a list of tests that were given, but we don't see the summarization or the results of that assessment. And this is just a definition of what transition assessments are.
So this, just to chime in here, this is arguably probably the most important part of the 8 elements of Indicator 13 is this element, because if you don't do transition assessments and you just write on the plan that, oh, the student is going to take X, Y, Z assessments, not only is that a red flag, it's the bigger question is, well, how did you even put this plan together if you didn't do assessments? So all of the post-secondary goals, the annual goals, the transition services are based on the information that you gather in the transition assessment. So,
and here are the red flags John was talking about.
So if we see, like I said, in that transition assessment section, it says student will take XYZ assessments, you know, next month.
Then the plan isn't based on assessments, it's just a plan to do assessments. And the plan must be based on post-secondary assessments already given. Especially for an older student, without those types of assessments or interviews or getting the information from the student, it's hard to write a specific plan in terms of what their training or what their education needs are going to be in the future. So if you leave it very open-ended in general for a junior or a senior, we're probably not going to let that pass. We're going to ask for something a little bit more specific from those kids, for those types of kids.
And just to come back again to that definition, so if you read this definition carefully, you're going to realize that in the context of special education post-secondary transition, the term transition assessment is an incredibly individual concept. So for a student that is college-bound, their assessments are going to look a whole lot different than a student with a developmental disability that is maybe going to go on to an employment or a community inclusion with their local developmental services provider, or maybe even a Think College scenario. The assessments are going to look very different. And The Transition Learning Community website, which I'll show you eventually, we have some different examples of what those assessments might look like, and then also where to find assessments. And I mean, again, these are formal and informal assessments that are based around your student.
And here again are some examples and non-examples. For example, under the non-example, exactly what we were talking about in December, Susie will take some transition assessments. What we're looking for is some information that tells us about the student's interest and or aptitude to be able to hold down certain vocational, jobs or experiences.
And also, don't forget to give us that little summary. So if, let's say you did, like the Life Center, like in this example, the Life Center Career Educational Inventory. So then there's a brief summary. Susie scored low, very low in the areas of daily living skills, personal social skills, and occupational skills, okay? That starts to frame the rest of the plan, and that should help you and your team as you're building this transition plan. So that might be one of just a few assessments that you did, and now you have this information that you gathered, and now you're going to be better prepared to produce the post-secondary goal and then the supporting annual goal and the transition services. That's why it's such a major red flag. If we see that these assessments were not completed, but yet you still have goals and services in there, we just scratch our head, like, how did you put those together? It really creates some doubt on our end, and we don't want to feel that. We want to really have a strong sense that this was put together in the most comprehensive way possible.
Question 4 is or are there appropriate measurable post-secondary goals or outcomes in this area? This is the one time in an IEP that we're asking you to speculate what the student wants to do post-graduation. In this case, what we're asking you to do is write a goal that you don't necessarily have control over, but you're intending that student to fulfill once they've graduated. So most of the time we ask you to start the post-secondary goal with that phrase, after graduation, upon graduation, and then fill it with the words will or shall. Make it as affirmative as you can, not using phrases like student may or student hopes, student intends to. Try to make it as affirmative as possible.
And the rationale here, the reason that the feds created this, or this format, is that they want it to be, it's like a guidepost. It's way out in the future. It's what the student and the family and the team hope that this student is going to achieve. And again, this is based on assessments, so it's realistic. And it's what do they hope to achieve after they leave high school. And then now again, we started out with assessments, and then we created this post-secondary goal, and so we're refining things, and then we're going to start looking at, well, how are we going to get that kid closer to that post-secondary goal in this current year, and that's going to bring us to the annual. Well, we still have some examples to go over for post-secondary. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but you see what we're after here. We have these goals for what we hope the student's going to achieve after they leave high school, and it should be written as an outcome.
Right, but you're not on the hook to make sure that happens. What you are on the hook for are the annual goals that lead the student to that expected event.
The annual goal and the transition services are what you're on the hook for that given year.
John, can you go back one slide? What I want to point out here is that under this section, the education and training post-secondary goal and the employment post-secondary goal are required. For some students, independent living can be not applicable, and so what we ask you to do in that particular section is just put an NA there. It tells us the team looked at that particular area or decided that particular area didn't apply to this particular student. That's the only section where you can put an NA.
So typically your students with developmental disabilities are going to pretty much across the board probably need the independent living section in the goals. We very rarely ever see a student with a developmental disability that doesn't really need or doesn't have an independent living goal. But like Ernie said, that you're going to have plenty of students who that is
right. If you've got a kid going on to post-secondary education or college, chances are they might be living in a dorm, so they really don't have an independent living need per se. It's more along the lines of someone who needs support in the community or to get around the community, support with housing. For the ED student, it might be support from a mental health agency, knowing those kind of connections and contacts in their community. And now here's some examples where, again, the first one says, upon completion of high school, doesn't say graduation per se, but upon completion of high school, Susie will be employed for 10 to 20 hours per week with assistance from a job coach provided through vocational rehabilitation. Again, that sounds very specific, but it's not something that you're responsible for. Your responsibilities for this would probably be making that connection for Susie with vocational rehabilitation. Helping her to find out what kind of a job she would like to have when she leaves school and training her toward that eventuality. So question 5 has to do with the annual IEP goals, and it's just like any other annual goal that you write in the IEP. We want it to be measurable. John, if you hit it again, I think, okay. And related to their post-secondary goals and services. In some cases, it may already reflect some of the goals you have in the IEP, especially academic goals if indeed the student is going on to post-secondary education or 2-year or 4-year colleges.
And again, like I was saying, this is what you're working on in that given the current school year to move that student closer to meeting their post-secondary goal.
And here's an example of an annual goal that's measurable. It has a percentage that you want to see accurate. I'm not sure where she's going to go on the 5% where she doesn't do it successfully, but the non-examples are Susie will practice riding the bus. It doesn't give us a criteria for success. A lot of times we see even where a student is exploring different colleges or different programs, training programs, we like to see a number there. We like to see how many colleges, how many programs are they looking at. Otherwise, it's very open-ended and it doesn't really give us a measurable. In some cases, though, we do accept participation. If one of the annual goals is to participate in a auto mechanics program at the local vocational site, that participation alone, a yes, no, is measurable. So that we would allow. Question 6 has to do, are the post-secondary goals, outcomes updated annually? This is the easy one. This is the one that I'd say 99% of the state gets correct because all you have to do is throw in the review dates. We don't look at last year's transition plan and next year's transition plan to see if there's been a update annually. What we rely on is the fact that you're doing this periodic progress review. And if you've written down the dates of that progress review, we don't even ask to see the progress review forms. We just look to see if the dates are there. And if the dates are there, we're making the assumption that you are making progress reports to either the adult student or to the parents.
Just a couple notes on this one. So for the post-secondary goals, so for a student who's in the younger range of the requirements, so let's say a student who's 16, so they are required to have a transition plan in the IEP once they turn 16. So, but their post-secondary goals might be more broad because the student is still quite young, and maybe based on the assessments, you figured out that they're interested in 2 or 3 occupational areas. So the post-secondary goal might say all 3 of those. Upon graduation, the student will be employed in XYZ, you know, fields of work or occupations. It could be broad like that. It would list the actual occupation, though I shouldn't use that XYZ example. It might say, upon graduation, the student will be employed in the automotive or the service industry or culinary or something to that extent. But you could have 3 different types of occupations, and then as they get older, the team is maybe refining that, making that more and more specific, so that in their last year of high school, it's really pretty specific. And by the way, it's still all measurable, but it might just go, like I said, from more broad to more refined, but measurable the whole time.
Question 7, are there transition services in the IEP that will reasonably enable the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals or outcomes? Here we're just looking for the things that are being offered within the school that help the student meet those transition goals, those annual transition goals. It could be meeting with the guidance counselor at school. It could be taking a career exploration class. It could be a voc rehab counselor, or it could be work study, things along that line.
If your high school has a dedicated employment specialist, it might be meeting with that person once a week to go out to an internship. It's going to depend on what are those annual transition goals, okay? So again, just in terms of thinking through this, remember it starts with the assessments, you're building these post-secondary goals, and then you built the annual goals, but now you need these transition services that are going to help that student meet the annual goal, which is ultimately moving them closer to their post-secondary goal.
So here are some examples: math instruction by the special educator, especially if life skills math is an important component of their independent living section or even their employment section. Self-monitoring instruction related to on-task behavior, again, for students who don't always have that attention span or that internal drive. Self-advocacy training, career exploration, and job shadowing. We also ask in question number 8, do transition services include courses of study that will reasonably enable a student to meet his or her post-secondary goals? What we're looking here under course of study may be just a narrative that talks about taking the required number of classes toward graduation requirements. Now that we're getting into some of the less just coursework and credit, there may be other things that you describe as part of the student's program. It could be work studies that they're doing within the school. What we're looking at a minimum is what's happening that particular school year for that particular life of the IEP. You don't need to list all the courses for all the years the student's going to be in school, and you don't really need to list all the courses they're taking unless they, again, relate to their post-secondary plan. So you might leave off things like phys ed class. You might leave off things that like the art class, if the art class doesn't have anything to do with their post-secondary goal. But it may be very important to a person's post-secondary goal if they want to be a physical fitness trainer or they want to work in some kind of art program. So
the rationale for why NSTAC put this in there is so if that student was to move to another school, the new school is going to need to be able to implement the courses that are, especially the courses that are tied to that student's post-secondary goals. So that's really what the course of study is looking at and asking for. It's what are really the primary or the most critical courses that are aimed at helping that student meet their post-secondary goals. And you can write them generically, so to make it even easier if that student did shift to another school. So, you know, if you had let's say there was an employment course at your high school that was offered and it had kind of its own unique name, you might just create a generic name for that course, as an example.
So here are some examples of courses that are listed. And again, minimally, it's acceptable if it only is the current year that the student is in, but we also would like, in some cases, for you to look at the student further out and see what kind of courses the student should be taking during their high school career. One of the things that is allowed is seeing an attached multi-year plan. And again, multi-year plans are going to be phased out over the next few years, but for right now, sophomores, juniors, and seniors are still allowed to use multi-year plans, and we would expect to see that in some cases, and that can suffice for the course of study. And so in this case, you just say, see the attached multi-year plan. The only caveat I would like to mention here is that if you say see attached somewhere, make sure that it's attached. And there's our contact information if you have any questions. John, can you open up the chat and see if we can?
Yeah, I do want to open the chat. Before I do that real quick though, I want to show you briefly the Transition Learning Community website. So if you're not already on here, just all you have to do is Google Vermont Transition Learning Community, and there's lots of resources. See along on the right-hand side over here where it says popular links and resources. There's a transition assessment planning form. That's what you would print that off and bring it to that first initial team meeting where before you even decided, just as a team to decide what assessments are you going to even do. This is done at the very earliest onset.
So that would be like a student who's 15?
15, yeah. Okay. And there's nothing that would prevent you from starting earlier. You can always start at 14 if you wanted. But anyway, this would be, for the student that is 15, and it would look at, if you pull that up, it breaks everything out into the employment, education, and training, and independent living. And it asks, what assessments are we going to do? Who's going to do what? And it just organizes yourself as a team. And then there's compliant transition plan samples of various students, different disabilities, and there's case studies. Now, down in the middle are announcements, and I also just want to point out that right now the registration is open for the Secondary Transition Vermont MTSS Academy. So that's a much bigger picture than just Indicator 13. It's really the career planning for students with disabilities, and it's run by Kansas University. It's a free professional development opportunity. It's about a 1 hour a week of commitment. And we've had incredible feedback over the years from Kansas University that they do an amazing job. So you can click on that to get more information and apply if you or any of your staff would like to take that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at what questions were asked. Okay, so the chat box. Let's see if anything was in there. Nothing in the chat. Let's check the questions. Okay. Yeah, see that. Okay. It looks like we don't have any questions. Okay, here's a question. Why are multi-year plans being phased out? Okay, I can address that one. The multi-year plan, which was also sometimes called the alternative credit accrual plan, is based around credits or Carnegie units. So for instance, due to the nature of that student's disability, they couldn't take Algebra 1. They may have done a life skills math as a parallel or alternative course to meet that same graduation credit. Since Carnegie units are moving away due to the education quality standards, everything is moving towards proficiency-based graduation, where to prove that a student is ready to graduate needs to be based on proficiencies and not credits. So that means that the multi-year plan isn't really relevant anymore. Now, if you look up the education quality standards under graduation requirements, there's about a page-long section. It's 2120.7, I believe. And we spent about 6 months crafting that language in there to protect our students who typically had been on a multi-year plan because we always want to remain a state that does one diploma for all kids. And that graduation requirement section articulates that once we shift to proficiencies instead of credits, that for students with disabilities, they may have modifications or accommodations to the proficiencies. And that's where special educators will be working with the PLP and offering some modifications to the proficiencies if needed. There is a number of resources on the AOE site about this. If you across the A to Z site on the top, look up P for proficiency-based graduation or PLPs, and there's 2 frequently asked question sheets that address the relationship between IEPs, PLPs, and PBGRs, as well as there's a second FAQ that has to do more with EQS across the board, but take a look at those. Email me if you have any specific questions as well. So this is why it's a little tricky using the question box, because it does things like this. You can still see them, but it's a little awkward. Okay, when is his first group? When is the first group due?
November 1st was the first submission group. It's for any IEPs developed between now, the training, and October 15th. So there's not going to be many in this first round. However, for those of you who did the early submissions, if you want to correct the 5 that we did earlier and submit those in the first round, that would be fine.
Any other questions?
If you need copies of the checklist that we ask you to do, because the process is that you self-review, attach a checklist, and then send it to us. If you need extra copies of if you want an electronic copy of that checklist, just send me an email, and I'll send it back out to you again.
Okay, so there's another question. We are confused about the independent living goal and how it applies to students going to college.
That may be where you put an NA, where they don't have any unique independent living need. They're going to college and going to be staying at a dorm just like everyone else, and so they don't have any unique individual independent living needs at that point. So in that case, you would just put NA in that particular. That's the only one of the 3 areas, the education and training, employment, and independent living are the 3 independent and independent living are the 3 areas. Independent living is the only place where you can put an NA.
Another way to think about it is, the rationale behind the whole transition plan in some ways is really to help level the playing field between a student with a disability and a student without a disability, to really give them that access to help them get to where they need to be. And if they're independent living, if they already have the skills around independent living, then obviously the team can decide that that's not something they're going to include. Okay, so a couple more questions here. So we did that one. You sent us a nice copy to us with pointers already.
Okay.
Okay. And then this is as compared to students with developmental disabilities. Okay, so I'm not sure, I guess, what the question is. This is as compared. So the difference, so if some kids don't have independent living goals, so students with a developmental disability typically would have some independent living goals, associated with daily living, major life activities that are related to them being successful after they leave high school.
It could be budgeting, it could be transportation, It could be lots of things that you're going to help this student learn how to do in order to better access his living independently or participating in his community.
Just as a quick example, let's take a look at Lisette. She is a student, a fictional case study, a student with Down syndrome. And so here you can see evidence of inviting the student. You'll see each of the 8 elements that we discuss is touched on here. But let's look at her independent living goals real quick. So upon completion of high school, she will utilize public transportation, including the public bus, with time-limited supports through VR. So given a bus schedule adapted with pictures, that was actually one of the annual goals you already saw an example of. Anyhow, so there's several more example transition plans on here, as well as you can click on, there's 14 different case studies from college-bound students with LD all the way to non-ambulatory students with medical and needs, as well as developmental disabilities, and what their post-secondary goals look like and what kinds of transition services they have. You click on that link right here. Okay, so I'll come back to questions. So do we have any other questions? How do we document that a teacher attends this training? I'm assuming you're asking, so how do we document?
You said it's a required training. Well, I would like you to either send me a list of ones who have, what we're going to do is send you a link to this because we've recorded this webinar. Have your staff look at it and just send me a letter indicating the staff that have viewed this, and we'll count that as having participated. Unless they're already doing today's. We'll have today's list already.
Any other questions? And feel free, you can contact either Ernie or I with questions, and if your team needs any more direct help, just let us know, and one of us we'll figure out how to get you that support. And just a quick shout out for any of the projects out there for transition. We have Project Search, which is for students in their final year of high school. We have a site in Chittenden County, and we also have Think College site at UVM and Johnson State, as well as College Steps is at Johnson State, Castleton, Linden State. So keep those in mind for your teams, and you can contract for transition services with any of those programs as well, if the student is eligible for dual enrollment. So you can contact me offline around any of these acts. Some of this starts getting into Act 77 and implications for students with disabilities, because it does get a little tricky. But if a student is enrolled in dual enrollment, they're using the dual enrollment funds to take the course, and then special ed money can be used for the vocational experience on campus. College Steps and Think College both offer that service.
If you have any questions in regards to, as you fill out the checklist, give me a call. It's always better to fix it before you send it in for review. If you're in doubt, you don't have to send them all in. Send in a sampling of the ones you feel are in compliance. And hopefully I won't send anything back. So.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Is that all the questions? Did we get to everyone then?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Good day.